I was standing in a garden in Holmes County, Ohio, with dirt under my fingernails that would not come out for 3 days, and I was holding a tomato so heavy it needed 2 hands. The vine behind me had bent almost to the ground under the weight of what it was carrying, staked 3 times over with old fence posts because one stake alone had already snapped that July. That plant came from a bucket of what we called black gold, and nothing about it ever touched a store shelf. 41 pounds. That is what one row gave us that August, and I am not going to explain that number yet, because you need to understand where it came from first. You have a bag of fertilizer in your garage right now, or you are about to buy one, because spring is coming and the box at the store tells you your soil is not enough on its own. Stay with me to the end, because I'm going to give you the exact ratio my grandmother used, the one she never wrote down, the one I had to watch her do 4 summers in a row before I understood it in my hands instead of my head. Tell me in the comments how much you spent on fertilizer last year. Just the number. I read every one, and I already know most of you will be embarrassed to type it. We didn't call it a method. It was just how it was done. Every scrap that came off the table, every bit of manure from the barn, every handful of old straw from the bottom of the stall, none of it left the property. It went into a pile behind the garden, and that pile fed us for the rest of our lives without a single trip to town. You have probably never asked yourself why a bag of fertilizer needs to be bought again every single spring. Not once. You just accept that the soil runs out, the way you accept that milk goes bad. But soil is not milk. Soil can build itself back, and it will, if you feed it the way it wants to be fed, instead of the way a company wants to sell it to you. Here is the part nobody selling you fertilizer wants you to think about. Synthetic fertilizer became a household habit around 1950, right after the war, when factories that had been making nitrogen for explosives needed something else to manufacture. That nitrogen did not disappear. It got repackaged into bags with bright pictures of vegetables on the front, and it got sold to people who had, until then, been feeding their gardens with what was already coming off their own land. There is no money in telling a woman her compost pile can do the same job forever, so nobody in that industry tells her. Think about what a bag of fertilizer is actually built to do. It feeds the plant directly, for one season, and it does almost nothing for the soil underneath it. That is not an accident. A company that sold you something to fix your soil permanently would only sell you that product once. A company that sells you something to feed your plant for 12 weeks gets to sell it to you every single spring for the rest of your gardening life. The whole business model depends on the soil never actually getting better on its own. Same bag, same aisle, same spring trip to the store. And somehow your yield never really climbs from one year to the next. And this is the part that surprised me most, even growing up inside a system that already knew this. My mother did not build a pile to grow bigger tomatoes. She built it because burning or dumping usable scraps felt like throwing away the very thing that fed you. The bigger tomatoes were just what happened when you stopped treating your own waste like garbage and started treating it like a resource with a season attached to it. There was a woman 2 farms over from us named Ruth, older than my mother, who kept a compost pile that had been in the same corner of her garden for over 20 years. I drove out to see it myself years after I left because I wanted to know if it was really true that a pile could outlast a marriage, outlast a barn roof, outlast 3 different tractors. It was still there, still working, still black and crumbling and smelling like a forest floor instead of a barnyard. I stood there and dug my hand into it up to the wrist, and it was warm, even in October, because it was still breaking down, still alive in a way a bag of granules on a store shelf never will be. Ruth's tomatoes that year filled 2 wheelbarrows a week through the whole middle of summer. She never bought a bag of anything, not because she was poor, because she had already solved the problem decades earlier and never needed to solve it again. I remember asking her, half joking, how much money that pile had saved her over the years, and she looked at me like the question did not quite make sense. To her, it was not a savings account. It was closer to a well that never ran dry. You did not measure a well in dollars. You measured it in whether the water came up when you turned the handle. Her pile came up every single spring, black and ready, whether the price of a fertilizer bag at the hardware store had gone up again or not. Now, I want to be honest with you about something before we go further. This is not a trick. There is no shortcut version of this that skips the waiting. What I'm about to describe takes a full season to build properly, and it takes another season after that to really show you what it can do. If you want a fertilizer that works in 1 week, this is not that. This is the version that works for the rest of your life once you build it right the first time. This is what the record shows, from watching it done for years and then doing it myself, wrong, more than once, before I understood it. Start with a base layer of straw or dried leaves, about 6 inches deep, laid across the bottom of your pile or bin. On top of that, a layer of manure, cow, horse, or chicken, whichever you have access to, about the same thickness. Then a thinner layer of kitchen scraps, vegetable peels, coffee grounds, eggshells. Nothing with meat or dairy in it, because that brings animals and smell you do not want. Then straw again. Then manure again. Then scraps again. You keep stacking in that order until the pile is about waist height. Chemists call the process aerobic decomposition. Thirsty is the right word, because that pile needs water almost as much as it needs air. Every layer should be damp, not soaked, about the moisture of a wrung-out sponge. Too dry and the pile goes dormant. Too wet and it starts to rot instead of break down. And you will know the difference by the smell. Rot smells sour. Decomposition smells like rich soil after rain. Turn the pile every 2 to 3 weeks with a fork, moving the outside material into the center, because the center is where the heat is. And the heat is what kills weed seeds and breaks everything down fast. A working pile in warm weather will actually feel hot to the touch a few inches under the surface, sometimes hot enough to see steam rise off it on a cold morning. If yours is not doing that, it usually means it is too dry, or the ratio of manure to straw is off, or there is not enough of it to hold its own heat, which is why size matters more than most people think. By the end of about 4 to 6 months, what started as layers of manure, straw and scraps will be a dark, crumbling material with almost no smell at all, and none of the original ingredients recognizable inside it. That is your black gold. Work it into the soil around your tomato plants at planting time, about a shovelful per plant, and side dress again about halfway through the season when the plants are setting fruit. A detail most people skip, and it matters more than almost anything else: the ratio of brown material to green material inside the pile. Straw, dried leaves and cardboard count as brown, and they are mostly carbon. Manure and fresh kitchen scraps count as green, and they carry the nitrogen. You want roughly 2 to 3 parts brown for every 1 part green. Too much green, and the pile turns slick and smells like ammonia. Too much brown, and it barely heats up at all, and you will be waiting closer to a year instead of half of one. Once you have built a few piles by feel, you stop measuring and start smelling and touching your way through it. The same way my mother could tell if bread dough was ready without ever looking at a clock. Location matters too, more than people expect. A pile in full shade takes twice as long to build heat. A pile sitting directly on concrete never gets the benefit of the worms and microbes already living in the ground underneath it, the ones that do half the real work once the pile has cooled enough for them to move in. Their earth, partial sun, somewhere close enough to the garden that you are not hauling a wheelbarrow across the whole property twice a week. That is the spot you want. I made every mistake there is to make with this before I understood what I was doing. I built my first pile too small, barely bigger than a laundry basket, and it never got hot enough to break down properly. It just sat there smelling like a barn for months. I added meat scraps once because I did not want to waste them, and I spent 2 weeks fighting off raccoons every single night. I let a pile dry out completely one July because I assumed rain would be enough, and it went dormant for 6 weeks, doing nothing at all. And the worst one, I used fresh manure straight onto young plants once, before it had broken down at all, and it burned the roots so badly, I lost half a row of seedlings in 4 days. Every one of those mistakes taught me something the books never could have, because the books do not tell you what burned root tissue actually looks like the next morning. There was also the year I trusted a pile that looked finished on the outside but was still raw in the middle, because I never bothered to dig down and check. I spread it thinking I was feeding the soil, and instead I dumped half-finished manure right against the stems and watched the leaves curl and yellow within a week. A finished pile does not lie about what it is once you actually reach into the center of it. The mistake was never checking. Trust the fork, not the surface. If you are the kind of person who would rather build something once and have it work for the rest of your life than pay for the same fix every single year, you already know what to do next. Come back, because what I am putting together next is the version of this same idea for people who do not have animals or a barn at all. And that changes almost everything about the ratio. Now, I want to be honest with you about the limits of this, because nobody selling you a solution ever tells you where it stops working. This is for anyone with access to a yard, a few animals, or a neighbour with animals, and patience measured in months, not days. It is not for someone in an apartment with no outdoor space, and it is not for someone who needs a fix before next weekend's planting. Anyone who tells you they can compress this process into 2 weeks and still get the same result is selling you something, and it usually is not compost. This also will not fix soil that has been poisoned with heavy chemical runoff for decades. That needs its own separate conversation, and I am not going to pretend one pile solves everything. It also will not work if you build it once and walk away expecting it to run itself forever with no attention. A pile left untouched for a whole season, never turned, never checked for moisture, will still break down eventually, but slower and unevenly, with dry pockets that never finish and wet pockets that turn sour. This is a low-effort system, not a no-effort one. 10 minutes with a fork every couple of weeks is the whole price of admission. And if that feels like too much, a bagged product from the store might genuinely be the more honest choice for where you are right now. I would rather tell you that plainly than have you build something halfway and decide the whole idea does not work. There is good money in selling a woman a bag she has to buy every single spring for the rest of her life. There is no money at all in teaching her to build something once that keeps working for 20 years. That is the whole difference between an industry and a system that was never designed to be sold in the first place. Nobody can sell you a monthly bill for something you are already making in your own backyard. Same soil, same seeds, same sun. And somehow one gardener buys a bag every April, while another has not spent $1 on fertilizer in over a decade. The difference was never the tomato. It was the pile behind the barn that nobody thought to put a price tag on. This weekend, go look at what you are already throwing away. The coffee grounds, the peelings, the grass clippings, the leaves you rake into bags for the curb. Start a pile in the corner nobody looks at. Come back in the fall and tell me what changed. Type the word gold in the comments if you have ever thrown away something that could have fed your garden for free. So here is where those two threads come back together. The £41 came off a single row of 6 tomato plants, grown in soil that had been fed the same black gold for 11 straight years by the time I picked that basket, which is why one row did the work of 3. And the black gold itself was never a single recipe written on paper. It was straw, manure, and kitchen scraps, layered and turned and watered until they stopped being 3 separate things and became one thing that fed us without a bill attached to it, ever. Waste nothing. The people who built this country with their hands were not doing without. They were doing it the way it always worked, before someone figured out how to put a price tag on dirt.